Hello and welcome to another segment of Intersections, Policy, Program, and Practice Exchange. My name's Elisa Gwilliam, and today I have the pleasure to be talking with Executive Director of Mental Health America, Duchess, Andrew O'Grady, and Professor of Psychology and Director of the Center of Aging and Disability Policy at Mount St. Mary College, Dr. Larry Force. So Andrew, before we get started with Carrie today, anything new going on?
Nope, we're just plugging away. We have a lot of new stuff going on in our agency, but let's focus on this. We have a great guest today. Larry will introduce her. Very exciting. We're expanding our reach. We wanted to reach people worldwide, and today, even though it is 6:00 p.m. here in New York, our guest is just waking up at 7:00 in the morning in Queensland, Australia. So that's very exciting. And we get to hear about, addiction and recovery and what the challenges are and what it's like in a different part of the world, because our goal here is to kind of educate people who are looking for recovery from addiction and, kind of make connections with them, something that resonates for them so that they can kind of grab on maybe at this moment and watch this and grab on and say, I can do it too. I can get clean. So they might be a day. They might be the first day trying, they might be 20 days in, they might not even be sober at all. But we want to provide various options and thoughts and think tanks from all over the world about how to recover from addiction and addiction. So I'm going to turn it over to Larry, who I've known for many years, and I love doing this webcast with him and Elisa. And Larry, what do you got?
Andrew, I really appreciate that. And right back at you. I also enjoy working with you on this. It started off as a concept, now we're into our second season. And Alyssa, thank you very much for stitching this all together. Really appreciate it. Carrie, it's an honor. It's a pleasure to have you. You and I met through LinkedIn. I'm a big believer and it's all about connections. And I went out there and then we started to exchange information. And then, we put together some options for dates and here you are. So we're so glad you're here. From your LinkedIn profile, and I'm going to ask you to obviously provide more of a history of it, but it talks about the fact of you being involved with Stories of Hope, being the founder of Stories of Hope in Australia. It also references in here, which I know that you're very public about because you have it here, is that you are 38 years sober. So who would have thought that, 38 years ago in your own mind that you'd be sitting here as a national and international spokesperson. When I did see on LinkedIn where you said that you were going to join us, and I did see some of the comments come back from your own network saying there's no better person that could represent Australia than you. Wow. So it really is an honor to have you here. And with that, we'd like to have this informal exchange. Maybe you can just give people like a 5-minute overview of how you arrived here.
How I arrived here. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm really honoured to be able to share with you all. And I guess I've got a real desire now to be very open about my story. I am the founder of Stories of Hope Australia and Stories of Hope Worldwide now, which I formulated through COVID. So I'm sharing stories of people from around the world. But I'm a big believer that if we can stand and share our stories, that brings great hope for the person who's sitting there totally isolated, totally hopeless, thinking that they can't go on another day or how can I get through this? And there's nothing like a lived experience story in that time, in that darkest time, to let somebody know that there is hope and that they're going to be able to make it as well. So I'm very much about, if I can make it, you can make it too. And so that's why I love to share that. Actually just had my 39th sober birthday in January. And it has been a very long journey and there's so many aspects to the journey, but being able to share those things with other people, to be open, to be vulnerable, to let other people know that alcoholism and addiction has no discrimination. Anybody can fall prey to addiction. and to let other people know that, hey, there's no shame in that. I think shame is one of the greatest killers, and shame's something that I'm also a counsellor, so shame's something that people really struggle with once they get sober. And I'm a person that wants to stand up and say there is no shame.
That's fantastic. You know, when you're saying that, I think well, I have a friend that grew up in the same town as me. His name is Bud McAtarian, and he wrote a book, and then him and his brother made a film called Anonymous People, I believe, and that was all about. Have you ever heard of it before? Anonymous People. It didn't
No,
really.
but I love the title.
It didn't get as much publicity, but it was really about the history of AA and where it is. And their theory was that there are so many people out there that are recovered in long-term recovery that nobody knows about because they are anonymous and they want to stay anonymous. But they believe, and I believe strongly, and it's I guess it's easier for me to say because I don't have an addiction, but if everybody just if people were treated the same way when they have their 1-year anniversary or their 6-month anniversary, as if they were recovered from cancer for 6 months, and everybody cheers them, and they have these walks for breast cancer awareness with 5 million people on a bridge, and yet, you know, somebody in recovery is doing it quietly, maybe in rooms, maybe they get a coin, but they don't tell the world. And I think if people told the world, like you're saying, it would reduce stigma. Now, the other side of that is, well, if people know that's who I am, then I won't get this job and I won't get this job and I'll be shamed. And, you know, so it's a balance. And but I believe we have to move the needle, and things like this and this conversation and what you're doing, I believe truly moves that needle. So I'm grateful for people like you, and I think it's going to make a difference long term.
Absolutely. Could you talk a little bit about Stories of Hope?
Yeah, sure. Well, Stories of Hope eventuated. I've been going for 4 years in January, and I have had 3 rock bottoms in my life. The first one was when I was 10 years old. The second was when I was 18 and when I entered finally and stopped drinking the 12-step rooms. And then around 4.5 years ago, I hit a 3rd rock bottom. And in my time of need, I was desperately alone. I was the person that was there for everyone else, that person that people perceived had it all together, had the answers, was the go-to person to help solve everyone else's problems. And yet behind closed doors, I was the loneliest person in the world at the time. I was suffering immensely. I'd lost my mum to cancer, my dad to emphysema. I'd lost 7 other family members, and my husband had just been diagnosed with a chronic illness. And my father had just passed away, and he'd been sober for 60 years through the AA program. And he was my greatest encourager in life, my greatest role model. And when he passed away, it left a real sense of emptiness inside me, not having any parents, no aunties and uncles, being the oldest sister of 2 brothers, and being mum. I've got 2 beautiful granddaughters and a wife to a husband that was very, very sick, and I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. I felt like an orphan. And I just felt disconnected, isolated, and I hardly had one person contact me in the 6 weeks that I pulled away from everything to see if I was okay. And I went along, I forced myself out of my home, and I went to a women's conference. And there I heard the stories of other people. 3 people got up and shared their stories of coming out the other side of hard times. And one of those guys that was at that women's conference that day was a chef that had lost his entire family in a fire 5 years previous. And he was up smiling, doing a cooking demonstration, bringing joy to people. And I thought, the fact that he can even get out of bed in the morning is just astonishing to me. And that was proof right there that even in the darkest time, there's hope that we can get back up again. And I had a light bulb moment in that conference, and that was, I can't have been through everything I've been through in my life for nothing. And it's not going to be in vain, and I'm going to use it for other people's gain. And it was right then that I thought, I have overcome so many things. I've been through so much. I have so many stories of things that I've walked out of. And if I could share all those stories, along with gathering, I'm a real gatherer and connector. If I could connect and gather all those people that I also know that have stories, together we could change the world, or change Australia. But I had a worldwide vision. And so I went to my local tavern and I said, I'm just wondering if you might be able to help me out with some rent for 3 months until I can get some support for this. But I really want to put on a free event for our community so that people that are going through the hardest times know that they're not alone. And they didn't know that their answer would determine whether I went ahead with my vision or not. And I'd always feared what people thought. I lived in fear of I had a terrible fear of public humiliation and a fear of rejection. And that fear had ruled my life for a long time. And it was as a result of a terrible event that happened to me when I was 17 in the throes of my alcoholism. And the fear of not achieving my dreams at that point became so much greater than the fear of stepping out and facing rejection. So I decided that even if only 2 people turned up, I would share my vision with those 2 people. And 30 people turned up that night. And those 30 people stood beside me. And I stood up with tears streaming down my face because my hubby said to me just before I got up, he said, you have just stepped into your purpose. And we've held over 60 events now. Thousands and thousands of lives have been changed. So many people have never shared their story before, and they all say that I've given them a voice for the first time, and that's something that I didn't even fathom. So it's having a threefold effect. It's such a blessing to me to be able to create this opportunity and to bring hope to the multitudes. And now we've gone online too since COVID because our events closed down for 8 months. So that's that's a long answer.
Oh,
Well, it's not a long answer, but we really appreciate that answer.
that's a wonderful answer. You're like a rock star. This is very
Absolutely.
I am a musician.
all right. Wow.
I am a musician as well.
That's great.
So, you talk about connections, and I always give this hand gesture. It's all about connections. So you're talking, and the next thing I'm thinking about is this would be a good connection. So in that proactive caring program, we have a mother who's a mother of a child with special needs. Her name is Stacy Orzel. And she makes me look like I'm quiet, like I'm sitting still. I mean, she's like all over the place. And she's an ambassador. One of her proudest accomplishments is she's a New York ambassador. And she's a New York ambassador to the Jessie Lewis Choose Love campaign. And Jessie Lewis Choose Love campaign was started by Scarlett Lewis, his mother. And Jessie Lewis was one of those children in Connecticut that was in first grade and kindergarten and was killed by that mass murderer. And here she is, like you're talking about that chef that you couldn't believe that he was up and around and being, personable. I cannot believe that this woman is running through the country and now internationally talking about forgiveness and love and forgiveness and love for the person that did this to her and her family. So I think at some point via email or some type of, I'll connect you with Stacy because I know that it's a blended interest, this idea of forgiveness and this campaign of love. Talk to us, Alyssa, would you be able to bring up that picture of Hudson River Psych Center? So as I mentioned, Andrew is an executive director of a mental health organization. June 16th of this year, I'm driving down a main thoroughfare in Dutchess County. And I look over and I see this building. I know what this building is. This building is the main building of a psych center that was built 100 years ago in our county. and they're now ripping it down. So I tagged it underneath as mental health at its best, the tearing down of walls. Andrew is a tremendous advocate, and he has the position to really present, an authoritative, voice to it about the fact that there really should not be two entries into the system of recovery, one being mental health and one being addiction. But there should be a blended entry and a silo. And looking at some of your stuff that you wrote, I also ended up getting that theme from you, that the idea of blending. So now the next picture is the picture that Andrew will talk to, because the next picture is a picture that was created from the shackles. It's a bell, and he'll give you the story of it. And Andrew, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, it was a Bell, Clifford Beers, who was the founder of MHAs, and I don't know if there's MHAs in Australia, but Mental Health Associations, Mental Health Americas. And he was a doctor, Dr. Clifford Beers. He was hospitalized for depression back in the early 1900s. And when he finally got out, because back then, you go in, you don't get out for a long time. I don't know what it was like in other places, but it's an asylum and you just get placed there. And he finally got out. And he was just appalled by the treatment. He was shackled and chained, and the mental health clients were, we've come a long way. But when he got out, he said, "Send me the shackles and the chains," and he made a massive change. He helped change things and get rid of that type of treatment and move on to something better. And he took all the shackles and chains that were sent to him, and he forged this bell, and it's about the size of the Liberty Bell in the United States. And it's a beautiful bell, and it has a beautiful inscription. But when I think about it, and Larry said, I'm a big proponent of breaking down the silos. So in my little world of treatment, in New York State, in our county, but in New York State and throughout the United States, we have the Office of Addictions, and we have the Office of Mental Health. And both of them have all these rules and policies and regulations. And, if somebody calls for an appointment somewhere, they do this little screening on the phone. And even though the person might be going because they have post-traumatic stress disorder and they need really serious therapy, if they mention that they drink every night to go to sleep, all of a sudden you're going over to the alcohol and substance abuse treatment center, and you're not going to get mental health help. You're going to learn how to stop your addiction without addressing what really needs to be addressed. Anyway, Larry, you used the word stuff, and I'm sitting here and I'm saying, it doesn't even have to be addiction or mental health or fall into either one of those two silos. And if we can close them, that's another silo. But in reality, everybody has stuff. Everybody has stuff they deal with. Everybody could be perfectly healthy and then have a period of time where they have their own stuff. And we just have to get to a society, a world where people just listen and feel comfortable enough to listen and allow people to vent and talk about what they're dealing with, and then show empathy and non-judgmental responses. And that's the big thing. That's where your shame comes in, because of the judgment that you're afraid, or anybody's afraid that they're going to get. And if we could just get to, now that's a Pollyannic view, but if we could just get to a place where people can have these conversations without shaming people or judging people, it would be a much better world, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, I love your words so much. I so identify and so relate to all of that.
Yeah.
Something that really was a catalyst also for me with starting Stories of Hope was that the people that would come into my counselling room, and I also do a lot of work with men's mental health, and especially the guys, I think because of the shame factor, they felt often like there was no coming back from what they'd done and where they'd been. And I always want to create that environment where people know that no matter what they share with me, no matter what they've done in their life, that they're still loved and they're still accepted after they share that stuff. And so having empathy and compassion, is such a, that's it right there, isn't it? When people know that we have empathy and compassion, they feel safe.
Yeah. And that's the connection the therapists have to make. If you want to be a therapist that's going to be successful and you're going to help people, you really have to be able to just project that honestly, so that the person sitting across the room feels it And if they feel that you really care and you're not going to be judgmental, then you have a connection. And it's all about the connections. You can't go talk to somebody and get better if you feel awkward or on edge, or, you know, you have to have a connection, and you have to feel like you can just be open and honest. And I can tell that you project that, and that's wonderful. And that's what makes a great therapist, somebody that can do that.
You know, I have a small private practice. So in my worldview, professional in my field is somebody who's writing, practicing, and teaching. That could be teaching at community level, college level, university, agency level. Writing could be blogs, could be books. Practice could be clients or communities. But this is what I tell my students. In my landscape session, which I call the first session with my clients, this is what I tell them. I'm not your hero. That's almost my opening line. I'm not your hero. And the reason I'm not your hero is because I can't fix you. And the reason I can't fix you is because you're not broken. We all got stuff. And to me, the best therapist you can find is one that you forget, because then you get back into the rhythm of your life. And to me also, what I know, if I see a client and it looks too good, it probably isn't. So when I have a client come in and they're, you know, everybody's fine and peachy and lovely and everybody gets along, like my radar is going off, because you know what? That's not life. We all got stuff. We all got, you know, ups and downs and family systems and everything else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to even think that, I mean, think about us. We're a gazillion miles away from each other. and we found each other. Is that accidental? I don't think so. You know, and now we have a combined voice. But this is what I want to ask you. The people that are watching this, some people are policymakers, some are program developers, but the most important people that are watching this are people that are, they're not sure yet. Or maybe they've made a commitment, they don't know how it's going to be. You know, and you remember those days, you know, you're 39 years plus, but I'm assuming you still remember those days of 2 days sober, 6 months sober, a year sober. What would you tell somebody through your stories of, you know, through your whole campaign, but through your own personal experience? What advice would you give somebody that's wavering? You know, is this a world I want to explore, which is sobriety?
I guess when I entered the 12-step room, I first went to a meeting when I was 16. And I'd been drinking for 6 months, and I was also addicted to prescription medication, and I dabbled in other things as well, but never really heavy drugs. And everybody in my world said to me, Kerry, you're an alcoholic. My mum and dad were in the program. All their friends were in the program. My boyfriend said to me, you're an alcoholic. You have a personality change. When you drink, you get violent. You can't stop at one. And I was like, don't be ridiculous. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm only 16. And so to shut everyone up, I actually went along to a meeting. And then I said, I'll prove to you that I'm not, and I will stop drinking for 3 months. So I stopped drinking for 3 months, and then I had a massive bender to celebrate the fact that I had been able to stop drinking for 3 months, and things got progressively worse from there. But I went into that meeting, even though with resistance. I heard a saying that if you're an alcoholic and you don't get AA, AA will get you. And I also heard the words, look for the similarities and not the differences. So I had all these older sober members sit there and point at me as they were speaking, and they all said, I wish I'd found this when I was your age. If I did, I wouldn't have lost my family. I wouldn't have ended up in a psych ward. I wouldn't have ended up in jail. I wouldn't have ended up killing that person. I wouldn't have ended up in hospital. I wouldn't have ended up losing my marriage. And this stuff, we can't delete what we hear. And this stuff stayed with me. And so I went out there and I kept drinking, and I gave it as hard a go as I could, because I thought, I'm only 16, you know, I'm really just kicking off here. But I think, listen to the people around you and ask yourself, what are they saying about me? Are they saying that I have a problem? Because the people around us are the best indicator of our behaviour and what's going on with us. We're often looking through distorted filters, and I'm sure that you'll all agree that part of addiction is delusion. And so when people are highly addicted, the state of delusion sets in and they can't actually see that it's them with the problem. They blame people, places and things. Geographicals, if I change my job, change my boyfriend, change where I live, if I move, then everything will get better, but we take ourselves with us. And don't wait until I would love to say this to anyone out there that thinks that they may have a problem with alcohol, drugs, whatever the addiction is. Don't wait until it's too late to investigate whether you might need help. Don't be ashamed to speak out and to go and tell somebody that you're struggling. And it's happened to me. The percentage of people with particularly drug and alcohol addictions that have suffered from sexual abuse, the rate is through the roof. And it's the biggest factor of shame out there. And to be able to get that stuff out and share that with a trusted person is the beginning of healing. And it does need to be dealt with together, the addiction and what's going on underneath the problematic stuff.
You know, in New York here, where I mentioned we're in Dutchess County, and years ago I put together a course at the college called Addictions Across the Lifespan. So it's a course that looks at different addictions developmentally. And one of the things that I would always do is I would take the students on a field trip to a place called Stepping Stones. And Stepping Stones is where Bill and Lois Wilson lived. And at one point, I got this call, which was like overwhelming. The woman that was running Stepping Stones, they were looking for a new place to put the documents, the original documents of Bill Wilson. Wow. And they wanted to know, was the college interested in holding this? I mean, are you kidding me? This is like found gold. But the problem is, based upon the consistency and the composition of the papers, they needed certain sensors and certain humidifiers and everything else, so it wasn't able to work. But I would highly recommend you and anyone else take a look at Stepping Stones. You know, Google it in. It's now a museum over the course of years where Bill and Lois lived. It's wonderful. I mean, it's so rich in history. So look, as we come to now, we're not going to say close because you know we're going to be talking again. Okay?
I hope so. I love it.
We have so many more things to talk about, you know, so we'll definitely do that. But from Andrew, from your perspective, what is it that you would like to ask her before she leaves?
It's too many things, but so I'm not going to do that. I just want to say that I think your stories are amazing, and I know there's obviously, you know, you only touched on a few things. We don't have all day, and your message. I'm listening to your message, your last message that you just gave, answer to Larry's question, and I'm thinking about all the women and all the men we have in our halfway houses that we show these videos to, and they're going to hear that, and it's going to resonate, and they're going to understand it. All these young people that watch this, I have younger kids and their friends watch these things. I mean, it's going to resonate, and I just think, you know, this is probably one of the best guests we have had, only because I don't know. I just think you relate to everybody. Plus, you look just like Phoebe from Friends, and I feel like I'm talking to her. That's a compliment, by the way.
Thank you.
You've heard that before, I'm sure. No, maybe.
No. I actually used to get Goldie Hawn all the time, but she's a lot older now, so I'm like, but the Goldie Hawn from the 70s. Yes, thank you.
Or Goldie Hawn's younger sister.
There you go.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. I was just thinking of. You talked about, you defaulted to that you're a musician.
Yeah.
What instrument do you play, and do you feel as though that music was part of a major support of your recovery?
Yes, I play the piano and I sing. And I started playing the piano when I was 7. And I think that that was one of the biggest saving factors for my dad and myself. My dad was a jazz musician, and he took up playing the saxophone early in his sobriety. And one of the things that you hear all the time in the rooms is get an interest. And I think I was bullied a lot through school, and I felt very lonely growing up. I grew up feeling lonely in a crowd, like I never fitted in anywhere. And the one thing that never rejected me was the piano.
Love it.
And playing the piano was something that I could just pour everything out onto, be intimate with, express my sadness, my joy. And it was just like the greatest friend ever. And unfortunately, after my mum was diagnosed with cancer, I stopped writing songs. I'd written about 50 songs, and I wrote my last song just after she was diagnosed with cancer. And I haven't really done much music since then. It's been something that I had a creative block after that. And I've recently started getting back into my music again because I realised through COVID just how therapeutic music is to our soul. And I started listening to so many more different types of music through COVID, and it's just been one of the things that really got me through.
That's fair.
There's another connection that I want to make. We have a friend and former guest, Catherine Sajak. And Catherine and I, every year, we go up to Harvard, the medical school, to do the addiction conference, participate in it. But obviously that's not going to happen this year. But she introduced me to this fellow named Woody Geisman. And I want you to meet Woody. I want you to meet Catherine. Woody started a rehab program up in Massachusetts about 20 years ago called Right Turn. And as he tells the story, he just found out that somebody was going to fund this organization that he wanted to start. He was a caseworker and wanted to start it. And he was making a right turn because he was so happy he was getting off the road. He was making a right turn, and that's what he named the place. But the modality that he uses is creative arts. Woody is a musician. He's a famous musician. And some of the people that have come there for recovery are famous musicians. And every Thursday night, I'm not sure how this would work out your time because it's 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, they have a fellowship meeting for creatives, for people that are writers or people that are musicians. And I definitely want to introduce you to Catherine, who will introduce you to Woody, because I think that, as you can see from all of our perspectives, Andrew's perspective, Alyssa's perspective, and my own, we're going to have many more conversations. And anything that we can do on our end to help, support what you're doing in Australia, please consider it done. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Alyssa. She'll ask you for some contact information to share, and then we'll bring this to a close.
Amazing.
Can I share one more thing?
Yes.
I just two things that I quickly want to say is, to anyone out there, you're never too young and you're never too old to stop drinking or whatever the addiction is. And also something that I say to everyone here in Australia and wherever I can is that when the lights go out at the end of the day, despite our profession, despite our job, despite how much money we have, despite what we look like, when the lights go out at the end of the day and we're alone in the dark, we're all the same. We're emotions in skin, and we're all human.
Wow, I love that. Emotions in skin.
Summarize it. Beautiful.
Thank you. Alyssa?
And Carrie, if people wanted to contact you, how can they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me through www.storiesofhope.com.au. And I also have 2 books that have my stories in those books as well as my Stories of Hope people. And I have a Facebook page, Stories of Hope Australia and Stories of Hope Worldwide.
And let me ask you something, and Andrew, I don't mean to take, speak on your behalf, but you say you have 2 books.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, you want to finish the sentence, or should I, on your behalf?
I'm going to be reaching out to you. I'd like a bunch of those books to give to the women and men in our halfway houses. And
Would you? That would be amazing. They're my books.
there you go.
Yeah.
And Andrew,
Wow,
I would ask that you would autograph them.
Yeah.
That would be very
hard to
powerful.
do, autograph 20 copies, but
Yes.
I'll be in
Andrew, I hope you don't mind me speaking on your behalf, making that.
no.
Thank you.
I,
All
I'll-
right, good luck.
I'm so grateful to meet you all. Thank you so much for today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Carrie, for being here today. And thank you for joining us. You've been listening to Intersections Policy Program and Practice Exchange. And if you'd like to hear this message again, share it with friends, or even leave a comment, log on to the digital resource section of our website, www.intersections-exchange.org. Thanks again, Carrie.